So, zeroing back with another visual novel primer. Not the one I've been planning, because getting through Hakoke has actually been taking me forever, but one I've always wanted to do since I'm a big fan of GIGA's products. Visual novel primers are informational videos where I do an overview of visual novel involving background information, basic overview including gameplay, and a tips and opinions section where I give tips on completing the visual novel and my opinions on it. Baldr Force has been fan translated to English just last August. While I did play EXE in Japanese many years ago, I have recently replayed every single route with the English translation on Standard Edition. And I will be incorporating footage from both versions along with covering any differences they have between them. Before we get started, well, actually it's a little different this time. Depending on the version of the game you choose to play, Baldr Force may or may not contain adult content. The English fan translation was done on the all-ages Baldr Force Standard Edition. The biggest differences between the English SE and the Japanese EXE version is that the Standard Edition has the main character voiced using audio lines from the PS2 version, along with a redone soundtrack. This includes voiced battle lines as well. The Standard Edition has also taken out all the 18+ scenes and put in 1 or 2 extra CGs, which I'm sure you'll be able to tell right away since they look wildly different from the rest of the game, as well as some minor censorship. It also has the convenience of being playable without any fussing around on modern systems. Baldr Force EXE on the other hand has 18+ scenes, the main character not voiced, the original soundtrack, and requires additional programs and or VirtualBox to run on anything higher than Windows 7. Pick the one you want to play, and if you're stuck with the Standard Edition, my personal opinion is that Baldr Force is perfectly enjoyable without those elements. The Baldr Series is an incredibly long-running robot action visual novel series by Team Baldrhead. Not quite as long as the Rand series, but they've been making them since 1999, and have recently concluded this series with Baldrbringer 2 years ago. The most famous entries in this top-down cyberpunk action series is probably Baldur's Sky 1 and 2, and the game we're currently talking about today, Baldr Force. There is an anime adaptation called Baldr Force EXE Resolution, but it's 4-episode garbage that somehow spoils the biggest surprises of the game in the first episode, so don't check it out. Unlike Rants though, the series isn't some insane continuous story that takes place over 20 years, but rather a series of games that take place in the same setting, and follow the same general ideas and themes when it comes to the story. The Baldr series as a whole are a collection of futuristic cyberpunk visual novels that all have the gameplay in the form of a top-down action game involving robots. Personally, my favorite combat system I've played from them actually has been from Dual Savior Justice, but Baldr Force is fun as well. The main theme for the games outside of cyberpunk and robots is military involvement, corporations, virtual reality, plenty of life and death drama, and a pretty solid mystery that spans across multiple routes. The Baldr series stories, for the most part, are usually pretty fantastic, and Baldr Force is the first one in the series that really nailed it and put their name on the map. Baldr Force came out in the year 2002 with an upgraded version called Baldr Force EXE, coming out only 2 months after the game released. An all-ages PS2 port with a remastered soundtrack came out in 2005, and finally an all-ages PC port came out in 2007, which is essentially a port of the PS2 version, with all the differences I mentioned earlier. Music is great. I'll be putting some from both soundtracks in the background of this primer. While the new soundtrack is filled with remixes, I have a huge soft spot for some of the older tracks, and I feel the original is a bit more unique sounding. Story and characters from the 2 games I've played have been fairly dark and intriguing, and the combat is surprisingly addicting and fun when you finally get into the nitty-gritty of it. So, let's start off with the easy question of, what is Baldr Force EXE about? The main character of our story is Soma Toru, one of the 4 members of the infamous Steppenwolf, which, yes, is the same name as the anonymous translator for the game, so that's where that name came from. They hack into encrypted servers and sell information to pass the time and make some money on the side. As a last send-off to their group before they disband and stop their illegal activities, Toru and friends minus Bachelor decide to hack into a military server with Tsukina acting as support. However, things go horribly wrong and Yuya is caught in a crossfire between the terrorists and the military, and ends up being killed by an unknown mech pilot while everyone else gets arrested. Seeking vengeance for his best pal, Toru takes the offer to join the military in the hopes of finding out who killed him. While the premise starts as a simple revenge plot, it quickly evolves into a tale regarding the military conspiracies, the cybernet they thought they were familiar with, and the hidden past of every character they meet. Who is the person who killed Yuya? And who is the mysterious girl Toru saw at the end of that fateful day? Throughout the game, outside of just making choices, you will also participate plenty of times during a chapter in the predominant gameplay, which is a top-down action beat-em-up. It's incredibly fun and actually kinda deep once you start getting into it. There are 4 difficulty levels, which you can change on the fly before any battle sequence. I recommend playing on normal and maybe going to hard once you get comfortable with the game. That said, if you don't want to bother with the combat, slap it on the easiest difficulty and follow the strategy I put in the tips section. But hey, the game is pretty fun and I really enjoy the combat and would highly recommend diving into it. As the hacker Soma Toru, you pilot mechs known as simulacrums, which are essentially the avatars for those navigating the web. These mechs are equipped with weapons to battle with viruses, defense programs, and other simulacrums. Battles takes place in instances where you usually can't save until the end of a series of encounters. Before starting any fight though, usually you are taken to a prep screen. This game plays on a combat system akin to God Hand in the sense that you set up your own attacks in a way you feel would make a really cool combo. Initially, you only start out with like 12 attacks, but by using attacks over and over, like in a JRPG, they level up and become stronger. Every weapon has a total of 3 levels of mastery, and by reaching a certain level, you can unlock future weapons to mess around with. They start out kind of boring, like basic weak punch, middle punch, and uppercut, but eventually you'll reach cool ones like double sabers, flying kicks, and exploding fingers to do massive damage. Leveling an attack increases damage and spread, changes its animation sometimes, and lowers how much energy it requires. You can set up your own controls, but by default, you'll have numpad 8462 for movement, and numpad 5 as a dash button that always homes in on the enemy, along with 3 attack buttons A, B, C, set up to Z, X, and C respectively. You can also just plug in a controller, which is how I played the game. You can set up a total of 12 attacks, with each of the 3 attack buttons set up for 4 different attacks, depending on how you are currently moving. You have an HP meter, an overheat meter which fills up whenever you attack, and decreases quickly after a second or two, and finally, a final crash meter, which is for your final crashes or superpowers basically. There are 4 different options here. Short range attacks activate when you click an attack button close to an enemy. Long range attacks activate when you are farther away from the enemy and click the button. Short dash attacks activate when you press the dash button and the attack button afterwards. Finally, normal dash attacks activate if you attack while you are in gliding mode, which can be activated by tapping the direction button twice. For the most part, you can set up which attacks activate literally however you want. That said, here's a general rule of thumb that might help. Normal dash weapons should be projectiles which you can toss out while gliding. Short dash weapons are ideal for close attacks as the easy way to get right next to your opponent. Long range is good for either dash attacks or range attacks, and finally, short range is good for, well, melee range attacks like punching or kicking. Again, these are just suggestions. It is completely up to you how you map out your attacks and which ones you use. I'll show you my loadout I use for a good majority of the game till the end, just for reference in the tips section. But honestly, just have fun! And finally, we have the final crash section, which is all the superpowers you get. You can only equip one, and it's activated by pressing all 3 attack buttons at once. And you'll overheat after using it, so it's a good combo ender. Unlocking these are pretty exciting because unlike normal attacks, you get final crashes by beating certain battles during routes. Usually battles where victory is optional are ones which have these attacks locked behind them. In Baldr Force, combat situations range from singular fights against bosses, fights against tons of enemies, and timed battles. Generally though, it'll be a mix of all of those, interspersed in a long series of battles, one which goes on without breaks. In those situations, you will still heal between combat rounds, and even during combat, after defeating a foe, you will heal a set amount of HP depending on how strong the enemy was. When multiple enemies are in combat at once, you will auto-target whoever is closest. For the most part, you want to win every single battle, although sometimes there are challenging battles that are optional with a forced crash reward at the end. Losing may lead straight to game overs or even bad endings. The choice to win or lose may also influence which route you enter as well. And that's all for base overview. That said, I'll quickly run over how routes work so you don't get too surprised. Baldr Force, like most Giga games, functions on a kind of enforced route order. Routes are locked until you complete the prerequisite routes, as the game reveals more of the overall plot with each character you go through. Initially, you have Minori and Aya's route open. Beating those 2 unlocks Sakina and Liang's route. Beating those 2 then unlocks the Mysterious Bachelor's route, and finally beating that route unlocks the final one. Once you beat the prerequisite routes, choices unlock at earlier points in the game, allowing you to jump into the newly unlocked routes. And that's all the info you'll need to jump right into the game. However, if you want some tips on things to look out for to get into routes, my loadouts I use throughout the game, or want to hear my opinions on some of the routes and characters, stick around. Welcome those sticking around! Let's start by covering what to look for to get into routes. I've already went over the fact that there is an enforced route order in the game. In addition to that though, in Baldr Force there is no hidden affection meter, but rather, choices determine which scenarios you enter and which endings you'll get. That and outcomes of battles. The long short of it though is that, win every fight. Losing may or may not be a short ticket to getting a game over screen or even a bad end. While not every choice is important, you should always keep a couple of saves for all the choices in the latter half of every character's route, as those ones are usually vital to deciding which ending you'll get. I'd say roughly at least 50% of the choices in the game are important in some fashion, whether they be important for getting into a route or important for determining which ending of the character you'll get. Outside of keeping backup saves, I think if you're paying enough attention to the story, you'll have no trouble getting the ending you want. Every character generally has 2 to 3 different endings, although I believe reaching any of them unlocks the routes. Even if it doesn't though, reaching every ending is pretty simple as long as you save before every choice. And there aren't that many choices in a single route anyways. Up next we got some combat tips. Again, let me re-emphasize that you should experiment with all the new attacks you get, and configure a loadout that is truly unique to you. For those who want an easy keep away loadout I used to no-brain a couple of fights though, here it is. There might seem like a lot of attacks at first, but there's only about 5 important ones. The most important 3 are the normal dash attacks, homing missiles, research missiles, and shotgun. Essentially, this strategy just involves tossing out your missiles any chance off cooldown and strafing around all your opponents. With both missiles at level 3, you have just enough energy to toss them off cooldown and fit in a shotgun blast afterwards. If you actually focus on dodging, you'll probably dodge most attacks without any problems. The shotgun exists to move close to enemies and blast them. This usually breaks their defense and stuns them long enough for the incoming missile barrage. It also helps break the monotony of just dashing around. Tackle is the next most important attack, as it's good for quickly knocking back an opponent if they get too close, or for getting yourself out of a sticky situation when you're surrounded. Lastly is the Force Crash Spectre Research Missiles, which is just an upgraded version of Research Missiles. Throwing it out after all the other missiles usually leads to easy massive damage. The rest of my attacks here are just for pulling off combos and looking really cool, but they're much less friendly and require actually knowing distance between your attacks. Really, as long as you have the 2 missiles and any attack to open up the enemy, that's all you need. Does it work on everything in the game? No, there are a few fights which mob you with so many units that you need to melee your way out. That said, for most boss fights in the main story, especially on easier difficulties, it'll decimate them. Do remember, you can always change up the difficulty anytime. While I played most of the game on hard, when I was repeating battles for certain endings, even I switched difficulties to get through it faster. Last up are some of my personal opinions about the visual novel, as well as quick listings of my favorite routes from bottom to top. Before I jump into this, there will be minor spoilers with regards to the appearance of one of the love interests that is hidden until you reach the route. That said, she appears in both the opening and on the title screen, so it's not that much of a spoiler. And I will definitely not reveal any of the actual plot of the game and will only touch upon why I like each route. Also, the ranking is based on my enjoyment of the route and not who the best girl is, but I will reveal who my favorite heroine of the game is at the end. Okay, so my favorite aspect of Baldr Force is the way the game utilizes enforced route order to make a compelling mystery that spans across the entire game's story. This might actually be a negative for some, which I totally understand. Some people dislike the idea of enforced routes for a multitude of reasons. For some, it's because you have to play every individual route in the visual novel to get the full story, as opposed to each route feeling complete on its own. Perhaps you can already tell walking in that there are some characters you'll probably dislike, and playing those routes may seem like a drag. Perhaps one of your favorite heroines ends up being one of the earlier routes in the visual novel, making her feel like not the main heroine since her route most likely doesn't touch upon some of the bigger mysteries of the story. For me personally, having enforced routes means that the visual novel has a chance to make a really long tail, one that unwinds further and further as you read through more of the individual routes. It also gives me a nice excuse to go through every individual route with the pretext that there's some sort of reward at the end, aside from like one lousy CG that says, "Thanks for playing the game," or something like that. I enjoy going through individual character stories, even ones I dislike upon first appearance, because I want to be pleasantly surprised by the story the visual novel presents at the end, and have it change my mind on who my favorite character is by the end of the game. With that in mind, I think Baldr Force does a fantastic job in presenting a narrative that reveals more of itself with every subsequent route unlocked. Baldr Force knows what you've learned through previous routes because you had to play them to get this far, and incorporates that knowledge while presenting further mysteries and facets to discover in the next route. It's also really fun to see characters in one route act one way, and then act differently in a separate route due to the different relationship they have with the protagonist. By having route splits happen relatively early in the game, it allows Baldr Force to have all these different routes to be incredibly unique from each other, with regards to who the good guys and bad guys are, and what part of the mystery they decide to reveal this time. The final route in Baldr Force doesn't make nearly as much sense or feel anywhere near as climactic to go through if you hadn't already gone through all the previous routes and formed emotional connections with the rest of the cast. All the themes presented in Baldr Force are interesting: the military talks, the huge conspiracies, the various factions, the aha moment as you realize what was going on in elsewhere while you're busy doing something else in another route. It can also get kind of dark in some places, the same way many other great science fiction works do. And when I say dark, I'm not referring to all of Genha's scenes, since they're the one part of Baldr Force that I feel are kind of gratuitous and exist solely for the purpose of slapping 18+ scenes into the game, and make us hate the guy even more than we already do. Also, I mean, I love mechas, and I think the combat is super fun. Learning new moves and being rewarded for completing fights that are meant to be beating is all icing on the cake. Alright, so on to rating the routes themselves. Remember, bottom to top order. This probably won't be too surprising since with enforced route order, some are less exciting than others by design, but here we go. First up is Minori Segawa's route. Honestly, unlike every other route in the game where I think they contribute something to the overall narrative, I have absolutely no idea what this route really accomplishes, aside from introducing the various factions that exist, which is done in the next route as well, just not to maybe to the same extent. It also doesn't help that it feels like it's probably the only route in the game where I don't even think the main heroine is that important to the route. Technically speaking, if you remove Minori from her own route completely, I think the story would still make sense, like you could still get from beginning to end. With regards to Minori herself, I think she's pretty boring personally. The nice girl with glasses, not much else for me to say. Next up is Ayane's route. Imagine you took Minori's route, but this time actually had the main love interest be the central point of the story. The fights in this one are actually pretty fun, and it still functions quite well as an introduction chapter. In fact, I think the centerpiece question is pretty much the same for both routes. That of Soma Toru and what he's willing to do to get his vengeance. Except that I think Ayane's route handles it much better. I enjoyed Ayane herself as a character as well, since she has the whole silent warrior thing going, the kind of personality where the fun part is seeing how she acts once you get past the front she puts up. What's the term? Kudere, I think? Fourth place goes to Liang's route. The two routes that unlock after the initial two are interesting because you get to see two entirely different sides to the main story. The first one being Liang's route, where you join up with the terrorists and get to see the story unfold from their perspective. Once you get past introduction routes, the game really starts kicking it off with the crazy conspiracies past the initial premise. It's quite fascinating to play out a route that completely changes up the roles all the other characters play, with all your previous allies now being enemies, and the characters whom you've seen as evil all this time are now the ones you're working with, no matter how good or bad they acted before. Liang herself is this energetic girl who's good at martial arts and is for some reason in a China dress, which honestly seems to me like a really out of place stereotype, but sure, whatever floats your boat, Baldr Force. Bachelor is up next, actually not in order of the enforced route order for once, since I think the second place's route is really interesting. This is where the visual novel really starts hitting you with the huge plot reveals, since by now you've seen the story from all the different perspectives, from the military, the rebels, all the way to the VSS. You've seen Bachelor appear time and time again throughout the previous routes, but now you get to see just what her story is all about, and the deepest of the mysteries of the game that have previously only been hinted, now are going to be revealed. Bachelor herself is fine, the genius prodigy with a chip on her shoulder. Nothing much for me to say about her personally, since you'll find it all out when you play the game yourself. Second place goes to Tsukina. Tsukina's route is probably the most uncomfortable route that gets weird really fast. This is just like Liang's route where all the darker elements of the game starts coming into play, except while they definitely were tackled in Liang's route, they're shown a lot more in detail in Tsukina's route. I really felt that was what was happening moment after playing this one. Tsukina's route is also probably the one that got hit the hardest with the censorship. That said, the themes and story are still perfectly intact, just perhaps not as directly shown. The events happening paired with the character who plays the childhood friend part does a great job of making them feel so much worse. And in first place, unsurprisingly, is Ren's route, or the girl that appears in the opening. This route's the big finale to Baldr Force as a whole, wrapping up all the last plot points and the final mysteries brought up at the end of the Bachelor's route. It's got the final boss, it's got the craziest conspiracies, it's got everyone involved for the final shebang. I like it as a whole, even if my personal opinion of Ren is pretty much a lukewarm, she exists. Personally not a fan of the whole super innocent, airheaded kind of character. With the routes out of the way, let's reveal my favorite heroine as... it's Ayane, the girl who puts up a code front and goes absolutely nuts during battle. The one thing I probably don't like about her is her hairstyle. That hair looks like it could block a bullet with how rigid it is. I'm a decent fan of that archetype of character, and learning about her before going to every other route made me appreciate all her subsequent appearances. And that's Baldr Force, a great science fiction visual novel that does a fantastic job weaving a multi-route mystery, and one that really does set up the world involving virtual reality, simulacrum robots, those who pilot it, and the powers that come with this futuristic society and technology. I'd love to check out Baldur's Sky sometime, so if anyone's interested in me doing a visual novel primer on that one, or any other games in the Baldr series, throw me a comment down below. I actually have quite a soft spot for the other games like Dual Savior or Material Brave, so if you want to hear me talk more about that, feel free to tell me that down below. I'm about to go into my usual, but stick around to the end because I have something important to talk about. Before that though, as always, the like button is down below, and if you like this kind of content and want to support me making more of it, the subscription button is there as well, so click that and the bell icon if you enjoyed it.